My name is Bianca Hayes. I'm 32 years old. At my sister Savannah's wedding reception at the Peninsula, Chicago, I approached the registration desk and gave my name to the coordinator. She stared at her iPad, scrolling repeatedly, her professional smile fading into confusion. "I'm sorry," she said carefully, "but your name isn't appearing on any of our lists." The words didn't register at first. I blinked, my chest tightening. "That's impossible. I'm the bride's sister." She tapped the screen again, slower this time, as if I couldn't understand basic English. "I've checked the family list, the VIP list, and the general guest registry. There's no Bianca Hayes anywhere." Behind me, the line of arriving guests was growing. I could feel their eyes burning into my back, hear the whispers starting like wildfire. "Is that Patricia's other daughter? The one who works for the government?" How embarrassing. My face burned. I smoothed down my simple black dress, elegant, I'd thought, when I bought it from a boutique in DC, but now it felt like funeral attire compared to the sea of designer gowns and glittering jewelry around me. "Please check again," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Bianca Hayes, Hayes. I'm Savannah Hayes' older sister." The coordinator's professional mask was cracking. She whispered urgently into her headset, and within seconds, a tall man in an impeccable tuxedo appeared. Gerald Morrison, the hotel's director of special events. His expression was one of polished authority mixed with barely concealed annoyance. "Is there a problem here?" His voice was smooth, but his eyes were cold as they assessed me. "This woman claims to be the bride's sister," the coordinator explained quickly, "but she's not on any of our lists, Mr." Morrison turned his full attention to me, his gaze sweeping over my simple dress, my minimal jewelry, my lack of designer labels. I saw his judgment in real time. "Your name again, ma'am?" "Bianca Hayes. I am Savannah's sister." "This is clearly just a mistake." He consulted his own tablet, barely pretending to search. "I'm afraid my staff is correct. Your name is not here. We have very strict protocols for this event, Miss Hayes. If you're not on the list, I cannot permit entry." The finality in his tone was a slap. This wasn't an error. This was a decision. The whispers behind me grew louder. I recognized voices: my aunts, my cousins, people I'd known my entire life. "That's Bianca. What is she even wearing? Patricia must be dying right now. I told you she'd cause a scene." My Aunt Diane's cutting voice. "You can't expect the awkward daughter to know how to behave at an event like this." The word awkward landed like a physical blow. All those years of being told I was too quiet, too serious, too different, it all came rushing back. "I need to speak to my mother," I said, my voice hardening despite the heat in my cheeks. "Call Patricia Hayes immediately, Mr." Morrison looked like he wanted to refuse, but the growing scene was clearly bad for business. He spoke into his radio. "We need the mother of the bride at the front desk, immediately." Moments later, my mother swept into the lobby. Patricia Hayes didn't just wear clothes, she wore statements. Tonight's statement was a floor-length champagne silk gown that shimmered under the crystal chandeliers, custom-made and clearly expensive. Diamonds dripped from her ears, her throat, her wrists. She looked like old money, though we both knew the truth was far more complicated. But when her eyes landed on me, her expression curdled into pure irritation. "Honestly," she snapped at Mr. Morrison, "can't you handle one simple issue without dragging me away from my daughter's special moment?" "Mrs. Hayes," the director said smoothly, "this woman states she's your daughter, but her name isn't on the guest list." My mother finally looked at me. It wasn't the look of a mother seeing her child. It was the look of an art appraiser examining a forgery. "Oh, Bianca," she sighed, the sound dripping with exasperation. "I really thought you were smart enough to understand the situation." The lobby seemed to tilt. "Understand what?" "Mom, just tell him there's been a mistake so I can come in." She let out a short, sharp laugh, not humor, but disbelief. "A mistake? Sweetheart, there's no mistake." The guests in line behind me fell completely silent, all of them openly listening now. "Did you really think you were invited?" The words hit me like ice water. "I'm your daughter. I'm Savannah's sister. And that, my mother said, stepping closer and lowering her voice to a vicious whisper, is precisely the problem. She glanced around at the watching guests, then continued, her voice cold and calculated. Marcus and his family are extremely important people, Bianca. His father is a congressman. His uncle runs a private equity firm worth billions. This isn't a list event. This is Savannah's future. She paused, her eyes raking over my dress, my face, my entire existence. We simply cannot afford to have your awkwardness ruining the night. We can't have you hiding in corners looking miserable, or worse, trying to make conversation with people you don't understand. The word awkwardness was a knife. Suddenly I was 16 again, at my parents' anniversary party, when I'd nervously carried a tray of champagne glasses and tripped, sending them crashing to the marble floor. I remembered my mother's face twisting with rage as she hissed at me in the kitchen. You are a clumsy social liability. You just humiliated me in front of everyone who matters. 20 years later, nothing had changed. I wasn't her daughter. I was her embarrassment. Before I could respond, the pre-function doors opened and Savannah emerged, followed by her groom, Marcus Wellington. Savannah was breathtaking. Her wedding gown, rumored to cost over $40,000, was a masterpiece of French lace and hand-sewn crystals. Her dark hair was swept into an elaborate updo woven with tiny diamonds. She glowed with the confidence of someone who'd gotten exactly what she wanted. She saw the scene, me, our mother, the hotel director. The line of staring guests, and her radiant smile faltered for just a second before transforming into exaggerated concern. Oh my God, Bianca, she exclaimed, rushing over in a rustle of silk and tulle. What's happening? Why are you still out here? Before I could answer, my mother spoke. Savannah, darling, I'm handling this. Your sister seems confused about tonight's arrangements. Savannah stopped, her hand flying to her mouth in a perfect gesture of surprise. Oh no, Bianca, you didn't get my text message? I stared at her, my mind going blank. What text? I knew it, she said, turning to our mother with a frustrated look. Her phone number is probably still the old one from college. I should have called. She turned back to me, her voice dripping with false sweetness. Bianca, I sent you a message weeks ago explaining everything. I told you that with Marcus's family and all the political connections coming tonight, this was going to be an incredibly high-pressure social event. I didn't want you to feel overwhelmed or uncomfortable. You know how you get in large crowds, you just shut down. I was trying to protect you. It was brilliant. Cruel but brilliant. She'd taken my social anxiety, a vulnerability they'd both cultivated my entire life, and twisted it into a weapon. She hadn't just excluded me. She'd reframed her cruelty as kindness. I didn't get any text, I said flatly. I check my messages constantly, Savannah. You never sent anything. You just didn't invite me. Bianca, don't be difficult, Savannah sighed, dropping the sweet facade. Why would I lie? I'm trying to spare your feelings. This isn't your scene. I was planning a separate quiet dinner for you later. Just immediate family, I echoed. But I'm not on the family list. That's when Marcus stepped forward. Marcus Wellington was everything my family had ever wanted. Tall, impeccably dressed, white, and radiating the easy confidence of generational wealth. He placed a proprietary hand on Savannah's arm, silencing her with a gesture. Listen, Bianca, he said, his voice smooth and condescending, like he was explaining a complex merger to an intern. Let's be practical here. This isn't just a wedding. This is a political networking event. This is a union of two very significant families. He gestured vaguely at the opulent lobby, at the guests still trickling in. Savannah is under tremendous pressure tonight. Her mother is. I am. The last thing any of us needs is the added stress of having to manage family dynamics. Manage, I repeated, the word tasting like ash. Your presence would be a distraction, he said bluntly. And honestly, you'd be uncomfortable anyway. These aren't your people. This stranger, this man I'd met twice at crowded family dinners where I'd been polite and quiet, was now barring me from my own sister's wedding. He was painting me as a burden, without knowing a single real thing about me. Before I could find words, my mother stepped forward again. Her face hard and final. "Let me be perfectly clear," Patricia said, her voice low and cutting. "So there are no more misunderstandings." She leaned in close enough that I could smell her expensive perfume, choking and cloying. "Strangers aren't allowed at this event, Bianca. And you made yourself a stranger to this family a long time ago. You chose your quiet little government job in Washington. You chose to be different. You chose to be less." She straightened, looking down at me with cold finality. "Now go home. Don't make a scene. Don't embarrass Savannah. And don't embarrass me any further." The word hung in the air. Stranger. My own mother had just called me a stranger. I looked at the three of them standing there, my mother, my sister, this man who was now more family to them than I was. They were a perfect united front. And I was out. The humiliation was so complete, so profound, that it went beyond tears. It was a clarifying shock, cold and sharp dot in that moment. Decades of memories flashed through my mind like a slideshow of neglect. I was 12, seated at the kids' table during Thanksgiving, while my younger cousins were promoted to the adults' table. My mother had said, "Oh, Bianca prefers it there. She's so shy." I wasn't shy. I was invisible. I was 15 when my mother forgot my birthday entirely. 2 weeks later, she threw an extravagant Sweet 16 preview party for Savannah, who was only 14, complete with a DJ and designer dress. Just to start planning, she'd said. I was 9, waiting on the curb after my school choir recital. All the other parents had come and gone. The sun had set. The janitor was locking the gates when my mother finally pulled up, not with an apology, but with exasperation. "Bianca, I had to take Savannah to her ballet fitting. You really need to learn to remind me about these things." One by one, the memories stacked up. Decades of being the afterthought, the quiet inconvenience, the daughter who just wasn't quite right. Not as pretty as Savannah, not as charming as Savannah, not as socially valuable as Savannah. And standing there in that lobby, the hurt didn't disappear. It crystallized. It hardened. The burning shame in my cheeks cooled, replaced by a strange, terrifying calm. They weren't just excluding me from a wedding. They were simply stating a fact that had been true my entire life. I was a stranger. The tears I thought would come never did. The shaking stopped. I lifted my chin and looked directly into my mother's eyes. Her fake pity faltered, replaced by confusion at my sudden stillness. I smiled. It wasn't warm. It was small, sharp, and cold. "You're right, Mom," I said, my voice clear and steady. "I am a stranger." Patricia's face tightened. This wasn't the reaction she'd expected. She'd expected tears, begging, a scene. I gave her none of it. "Then I'll live like a stranger." I turned, my back straight, and walked away from them. I didn't look back. I didn't acknowledge the hotel director quietly directing other guests into the ballroom. I simply walked toward the guest elevators, my heels clicking evenly on the marble floor. Behind me, I heard Savannah's voice, no longer sweet, but sharp with panic. "Bianca, don't you dare." She shouted. I kept walking. "Bianca, you come back here. If you make a scene, if you ruin this for me." I reached the elevator and pressed the up button. "Don't you call Grandma." Savannah's voice was getting closer, desperate now. "Don't you dare call Aunt Diane or Uncle Robert. Don't you ruin this. Don't you make me look bad." Her words were an unintended confession. She wasn't worried about my feelings. She was terrified I would report her actions, that I would tarnish the perfect image she was presenting to her new wealthy family. The elevator chimed. The brass doors slid open. I stepped inside. Savannah and my mother had stopped a few feet away, watching me, their faces a mixture of fury and uncertainty. They expected me to leave the hotel in tears, to run home and cry. I just stood in the elevator and looked at them. The doors began to close, shutting out their shocked faces. Alone in the mirrored elevator, I did not cry. I reached into my clutch and pulled out my phone. My hands were perfectly steady. I scrolled past Mom, past Savannah, past Aunt Diane. I opened a secure messaging app and found the name at the top, Jamal. My fingers typed out a short, precise message. They just kicked me out of the reception. Activate the wedding gift. I paused, then added one more line, 7:00 p.m. sharp. As planned. I hit send. The message delivered instantly. As the elevator ascended, I felt nothing but cold, quiet purpose. The stranger had just sent her regards. The clock was now ticking. The elevator doors slid closed, sealing me in polished silence. My family below thought I was defeated, thought I was leaving to cry in my small DC apartment. They were wrong. I pressed the button for the top floor, the penthouse level. When the doors opened, I wasn't in a main hallway. I was in a private, hushed foyer, carpeted in thick velvet, with soft lighting, and a single elegant desk. A concierge in a sharp uniform stood immediately. "Good evening, Miss Hayes," he said, his voice discreet and respectful. He didn't question my presence. He'd been expecting me. "Good evening, Charles," I replied. "Is the suite ready?" "Of course, ma'am. Your luggage is inside, and everything has been prepared to your preferences." He handed me a sleek black keycard. "The presidential suite. We hope everything is to your satisfaction." This was the first layer of my secret. While my mother criticized my little government job, I'd been saving, investing, and building a life she knew nothing about. I could more than afford a suite that cost more per night than her monthly country club dues. I'd booked it 2 months ago, the moment Savannah announced her wedding date. I knew I would need a sanctuary. I walked down the private hallway, unlocked the door, and stepped inside. It was magnificent. A 2-story wall of glass overlooked the entire Chicago skyline on one side, and on the other, a perfect view down onto the terrace and grand ballroom, where my sister's reception was about to begin. I could see the guests mingling below like tiny dolls. I walked past the grand piano, past the unlit marble fireplace, and picked up the phone. "Yes, room service. I'd like a bottle of Dom Pérignon, the 2008 vintage, and the beluga caviar platter." "Thank you." I kicked off my sensible heels, peeled off the black dress my mother had found so inadequate, and slipped into a simple silk robe. I poured myself a glass of sparkling water while I waited for the champagne, then walked to the window, looking down at the party I'd been banned from. The clock on the wall read 6:45 p.m., 15 minutes. The champagne arrived. I poured a glass, the bubbles rising in the crystal flute. I held it up not in a toast to them, but to myself, to the stranger. "Let it begin," I whispered. It was exactly 7:00 p.m. Downstairs, the grand ballroom doors swung open. The room was breathtaking, a carefully curated fantasy of white roses, cascading orchids, and dripping crystal chandeliers. 300 of Chicago's most powerful people stood in a sea of tuxedos and designer gowns, their faces turned toward the aisle. The string quartet my mother had boasted, cost more than my entire annual salary, swelled into the bridal chorus. This was the moment, the apex of my mother's ambition and my sister's dreams. And there she was, Savannah. She wasn't just a bride. She was a spectacle. Her $40,000 gown seemed to float, catching light from dozens of chandeliers. Her veil trailed behind her, held by 2 small flower girls in matching white dresses. She looked radiant, triumphant. She'd won. She'd secured the ultimate prize, Marcus Wellington, the wealthy, well-connected man who would guarantee her a life of luxury and status. I watched from my penthouse suite. High above them, I watched as Savannah beamed, locking eyes with her groom. But Marcus did not look like a man in love. He stood at the altar, sweating visibly under the lights. His smile was tight, plastic. While every guest watched Savannah, Marcus's eyes kept darting down to check his phone hidden in his palm. Once, twice, he saw a message, and I saw his hand tremble before he shoved the phone back into his pocket. He looked less like a groom and more like a man waiting for a verdict. Savannah reached the altar. She handed her bouquet to her maid of honor, completely oblivious to his panic. She looked up at Marcus, her eyes shining with adoration. Marcus forced his smile wider. He looked trapped. My father stepped forward, beaming with pride, and placed Savannah's hand into Marcus's. The music softened. The guests sat down with a collective rustle of expensive fabric. The officiant, a prominent Chicago pastor whose presence alone was a status symbol, smiled benevolently at the crowd. He raised his hands. "Dearly beloved," he began, his voice echoing through the silent room. "We are gathered here today to join this man, Marcus, and this woman, Savannah, in holy matrimony." He just launched into his speech about the sanctity of marriage when the first phone vibrated. It wasn't a soft buzz. It was deep, powerful, so strong it seemed to rattle the polished floor. It came from the front row. Congressman Davies, Marcus's most important guest and a key political ally, frowned. He slowly reached into his tuxedo pocket, pulling out his phone with clear annoyance. He glanced at the screen. The annoyance vanished, replaced by pure shock. His face went ashen. His eyes widened. He made a small gasping sound, as if someone had just punched him. He didn't silence the phone. He clutched it, staring at the screen like it was a venomous snake. At the exact same moment, my mother Patricia's designer handbag at her feet began vibrating violently. A sharp, insistent buzz. Patricia flinched, her face contorting with rage. How dare someone interrupt this perfect moment? She nudged the bag with her expensive shoe, trying to silence it. It stopped for a second, and she flashed an apologetic smile at the officiant, but the moment he cleared his throat to continue, her phone buzzed again, louder, more frantic. The guests in the second row could hear it. Patricia, her smile frozen, fumbled for the bag. She pulled out her phone, angrily mashing the silence button. It wouldn't silence. It buzzed again. A new alert, overriding her command. She stared at the screen, confusion creasing her brow. A news alert from Bloomberg. Why was that on her phone? Before she could process it, another phone rang, then Marcus's best man, then someone in the third row, then another, and another. It was no longer one or two phones. It was a wave, a digital plague sweeping through the most important people in the room. A cascade of vibrations and soft chimes rippled from front to back. The officiant paused, his words about love and commitment dying on his lips. The air, once filled with reverent silence, was now thick with anxious murmuring. Guests were no longer discreet. Phones were being pulled from tuxedo pockets and designer clutches across the ballroom. The soft glow of chandeliers was suddenly competing with the harsh blue-white light of dozens of screens, illuminating faces frozen in disbelief. Whispers erupted, merging into a rising tide of panic. "Oh, my God, Bill, did you see this? What's going on?" "It's from the Wall Street Journal. Mine says Bloomberg, Wellington Equity. Federal investigation? Ponzi scheme?" "It says suspected Ponzi scheme. My entire pension is with Wellington." The whispers grew louder, less concerned with politeness. "Shut up. He'll hear you." Savannah, at the altar, finally realized this wasn't a minor disruption. Her perfect bridal smile faltered, twisting into confusion, then rage. "What is wrong with everyone?" She hissed at our mother in the front row. "Tell them to put their phones away. This is my wedding." Patricia looked frantic, her eyes darting, not to Savannah, but to Congressman Davies. But the congressman was no longer looking at the altar. He was staring at his phone, his face a mask of cold fury. He slowly, deliberately stood up, without a word. He began walking toward the exit. His wife, looking utterly humiliated, scrambled to follow him, and Marcus just stood there, rigid. He was watching the congressman leave, his face slick with sweat. He looked like a man who'd just watched his last escape route catch fire. He knew it was over. The officiant, looking pale and utterly thrown, cleared his throat. He tried desperately to regain control of the room, his voice straining to be heard over the anxious whispers. "Marcus," he said, forcing authority into his tone, "do you take Savannah to be your lawfully wedded wife?" This was the moment, the cue for Marcus to say, "I do." But Marcus didn't speak. He was frozen, His eyes locked on the phone of a guest in the third row, the screen clearly visible to him, displaying a bright, flashing headline: Wellington equity founder accused of multi-million-dollar Ponzi scheme. Federal investigation underway. Savannah, oblivious, was still gazing at him adoringly, her bridal smile plastered on her face. "Marcus," she prompted, her voice a little tight now. Marcus's face, which had been slick with sweat, turned a horrifying, pasty white. The color drained from his lips. He looked like he might be sick right there at the altar. He made a small choking sound. "Marcus," Savannah said again, her voice now sharp with confusion and rising panic. He took one stumbling step back, pulling his hand away from hers as if he'd been burned. The guests fell into stunned silence, watching this new, unexpected drama unfold. Marcus stammered. He looked at Savannah, then at the officiant, then at the sea of panicked, accusing faces in the crowd. He looked at Congressman Davies, who was now at the ballroom exit, his face like thunder. "I need a minute," Marcus whispered, and then he did the unthinkable. He turned and ran. He didn't just walk away. He ran off the altar, pushing past a massive arrangement of white roses, and sprinted down the side aisle toward a service exit. For one full second, the entire room was frozen in absolute, stunned silence. Then Savannah's perfect, practiced composure shattered completely. It wasn't a ladylike scream. It was a raw, primal shriek of abandonment and fury that echoed off the crystal chandeliers. "Marcus." The entire room exploded. Guests leaped to their feet. The string quartet screeched to a halt, the final note of the bridal chorus hanging in the air like a bad joke. People were shouting, "What's happening? Did he just leave her? My God, it's true. The news is true." Chaos. Absolute beautiful chaos, and from my penthouse suite, I watched it all unfold. Sipping my champagne, I saw the tiny figure of the groom flee the ballroom. I saw the wedding I'd been forbidden to attend implode in real time. The ballroom was pure pandemonium. Guests were standing, shouting to each other, their faces a mixture of confusion and greedy excitement. This was better than gossip. This was a scandal unfolding live. Phones were held high, recording everything. The beautiful string quartet sat silent, musicians staring wide-eyed, bows frozen midair. I watched from my window as Savannah stood alone at the altar, her veil slightly askew, her bouquet clutched to her chest. Her face was a mask of disbelief. This wasn't in the script. This perfect $40,000 moment was ruined. Then her disbelief curdled into something else. Rage. Where did he go? She screamed, not at anyone in particular, but at the universe itself. She hitched up her massive gown, her movements no longer graceful, but sharp and frantic. My mother Patricia finally unfroze. Her face was ashen, her eyes darting around at the recording phones, at the whispering guests. This was more than a ruined wedding. This was social annihilation. All her work, all her climbing, all her sacrifices evaporating in front of 300 of Chicago's most important people. "Savannah, stop," Patricia hissed, grabbing her arm. "We have to manage this. We need to make an announcement." "Manage what?" Savannah shrieked, ripping her arm away. He left me." She didn't care about the guests anymore. She hiked up her skirt again and ran off the altar, shoving past the same flower arrangement Marcus had knocked over. She stormed down the side aisle, her face a terrifying mask of fury. Marcus Wellington, you get back here." Patricia, gathering her own shredded dignity, ran after her. "Savannah, wait, don't make this worse." I watched them both disappear through the service door Marcus had used. The guests, left alone in the ballroom, erupted into a full-blown roar of conversation. I knew where they were headed. The groom's private suite, just down the hall. I wished I could be a fly on that wall. I took another slow sip of my champagne. The wedding gift was being delivered perfectly. The service door slammed open, revealing a plush private hallway. Savannah, hiking up her $40,000 gown with furious hands, ran ahead of her mother. She found the door to the groom's suite and threw it open without knocking, the heavy wood crashing against the wall. Marcus was there, but he was not the calm, charming man from the altar. Marcus Wellington was a whirlwind of panic. His custom tuxedo jacket was thrown on a chair, his bow tie ripped off and discarded on the floor. He was frantically stuffing files and a laptop from his briefcase into a black leather duffel bag. He looked cornered. Wild. What the hell was that? Savannah shrieked, her voice cracking with hysteria. You humiliated me. You left me at the altar in front of everyone we know. Shut up, Savannah, Marcus snarled, not even looking at her. He zipped the bag, his hands shaking so badly he could barely manage it. Just shut up. I have to go, now. Patricia pushed past her sobbing daughter, her face pale, but her eyes blazing with cold fury. You're going nowhere, young man, she commanded. You will march back into that ballroom, and you will fix this. Do you have any idea what you've just done to our reputation? Marcus finally looked up. The man they saw was terrified. Reputation? He laughed, a high, strangled sound that was more terrifying than anger. That's what you're worried about. It's over. Don't you understand? It is over. What is over? Savannah sobbed, sinking onto an ottoman. What are you talking about? They know, Marcus yelled, grabbing his coat. The news alerts that wasn't a rumor. The feds, the FBI, they're at my office right now. They're seizing everything. The accounts are frozen. They know. Patricia grabbed his arm, her polished nails digging into his sleeve. What do you mean they know? You told me this was handled. You said it was just a minor SEC issue. You said it was creative financial structuring. Savannah's head snapped up, her sobbing cut short. Mom, what did you know? Patricia ignored her, eyes locked on Marcus, her mask of composure finally cracking. You promised me everything was stable. Marcus ripped his arm free, his face twisting in pure contempt. Stable? You didn't want stable, Patricia. You just wanted the checks to clear. He jabbed a finger at her. You took my money. You knew it was questionable. You didn't ask a single hard question when I transferred $600,000 to your private account, did you? Patricia stumbled back as if struck. That was a gift. For Savannah. For the wedding. It was a payoff, Marcus roared. A $600,000 payoff to get you to push this wedding through before I was indicted. To buy your family's good name as cover. You took the money. You spent it. You're an accomplice, Patricia. You're in this just as deep as I am. Savannah's sobs hitched in her throat, choking her. She slowly turned her head, her tear-streaked face moving from Marcus, the man who'd just abandoned her, to Patricia, her mother. Her brain was struggling, trying to connect Marcus's furious words. 600,000. A payoff to push the wedding. Mom. Savannah's voice was a small, broken whisper, almost inaudible, a child's voice. What is he talking about? What money? Patricia's face was pure panic. She couldn't look at Savannah. She couldn't look at Marcus. She just stared at a point on the expensive wallpaper, her eyes wide with terror. He's lying, darling. He's desperate. He's just saying anything to hurt us, to make us look bad. Lying? Marcus barked out an ugly laugh. Am I lying, Patricia? Ask her. Ask your mother to show you the statements for her private Swiss account. Ask her what that $600,000 wire transfer was for. Dated just 3 days after I surprised you with the proposal. Savannah stood up slowly from the ottoman, her massive gown suddenly feeling like a heavy, ridiculous costume. She took one step, then another, toward Patricia. Mom, she said again, her voice stronger now, sharp with horrifying suspicion. You took money from him? You took $600,000? Patricia finally looked at her daughter, her perfect composure completely shattered. She was cornered. It wasn't like that, Patricia stammered, her manicured hands fluttering like trapped birds. It was a gift. A wedding gift for you, Savannah. To secure your future. To make sure you were taken care of, no matter what happened. A wedding gift. Savannah repeated, her voice dangerously quiet. A $600,000 secret gift that you put in a Swiss account? A gift that was dependent on me marrying him before he got caught? The pieces were clicking into place with sickening speed. the relentless pressure from her mother to set a date, the way Patricia had brushed off every small doubt Savannah had expressed about Marcus's intensity, his secrecy about his business, the constant refrain, "Just lock him down, Savannah. A man like that doesn't wait forever." It wasn't about her happiness. It wasn't even about social status. It was a transaction. She was the product being sold, and her own mother was the broker. Marcus, seeing the scene he'd created, just sneered. He slung the black duffel bag over his shoulder. "Call it whatever moral nightmare you want," he spat. "A gift, a payoff, a commission. I don't care anymore. It's over. We are done." Marcus's words, "we are done," hung in the air like a final verdict. Savannah was staring at her mother with dead, empty eyes, the full scope of betrayal finally landing. Patricia was gasping, her hand at her throat, realizing she'd been outplayed and exposed by her own greed. Marcus, his duffel bag over his shoulder, sneered at them both. "Enjoy explaining this to your society friends." He made for the door, but the door opened before he could touch it. No, not the suite door. Back in the grand ballroom, the main doors burst open with a crash, slamming against the walls. The sound cut through the hysterical chatter. It wasn't the wedding planner. It wasn't the hotel manager. It was four men in dark, identical government-issued suits. They were not smiling. They moved not like guests, but like a tactical unit, fanning out just inside the doorway, their eyes scanning the room with cold, professional assessment. The air in the ballroom didn't just quiet, it was sucked out. Every guest, from the congressman to the private equity managers, froze. The phones that had been gleefully recording Savannah's humiliation were now held in trembling hands, suddenly pointed at this new, terrifying development. This was no longer a social scandal. This was a federal event. The lead agent, a tall, imposing man with a grim face, ignored the abandoned altar. He ignored the 5-tiered cake and the mountains of roses. He walked directly to the trembling hotel manager, Mr. Morrison, who was plastered against a wall. The agent didn't raise his voice, but his words carried across the dead silent room. "We are federal agents. We're looking for Marcus Wellington." Mr. Morrison, his face chalk white, could only point a shaking finger toward the service hallway. He went that way. He ran to the groom's suite. The bride and her mother followed him. The lead agent nodded once, his eyes cold. He spoke into his radio. "He's in the North Wing suites. Secure the exits." He motioned to two of his men, who immediately moved toward the same hallway Marcus had fled down. The other two agents remained, effectively sealing the ballroom. In the groom's suite, Marcus heard the heavy running footsteps in the hall. He froze, his hand on the doorknob. The game was up. He was no longer a groom escaping a wedding. He was a criminal, and his time had run out. The heavy footsteps thundered down the hall and stopped directly outside the door. Marcus, frozen with his hand on the knob, didn't even have time to react before the door was kicked open, slamming against the wall with enough force to shake the artwork on the walls. Two federal agents filled the doorway, their expressions grim, their hands on their belts. "Marcus Wellington," the lead agent commanded. Marcus tried to muster his charm, his last pathetic weapon. He raised his hands in a gesture of surrender. "Gentlemen, there seems to be a terrible misunderstanding. I was just on my way to talk to my lawyers. You can talk to them from central booking," the agent said, stepping forward. "You're under arrest for securities fraud, wire fraud, and money laundering." He pulled out handcuffs. Savannah let out a thin, sharp wail as the first cuff clicked shut around Marcus's wrist. "No, you can't. This is my wedding." The agents ignored her completely. They cuffed Marcus's other hand behind his back, his expensive duffel bag dropping uselessly to the floor. "Which way out?" the agent asked his partner. "Main ballroom is closest to the service elevator, sir. Then we go through the ballroom," the lead agent commanded. "I want every witness in there to see he's in custody." This wasn't a quiet, discreet arrest. This was a message. They pushed Marcus out of the suite and back into the main hallway. Patricia and Savannah stumbled out after them, a grotesque bridal procession following the arrested groom. The doors to the ballroom were still wide open. The guests who'd been standing in confused, anxious groups all turned as one. A collective gasp sucked the air from the room. There he was, Marcus Wellington, the groom, in handcuffs, being marched through the center of his own reception by federal agents. The silence lasted for a single horrified heartbeat, then every phone in the room was raised high. Red record lights glowing in the dim romantic lighting. Tiffany Monroe, the city's most ruthless society blogger whom Savannah had personally invited to capture every moment, was already live streaming. Her voice was gleeful, a sharp whisper to her 700,000 followers. "You are not going to believe this, darlings. The wedding of the year is officially over. Marcus Wellington is being arrested at his own altar." The flashes from phones were relentless, a strobe light of humiliation. Patricia stood there, frozen, watching it all. She wasn't just watching Marcus's arrest. She was watching the faces of her rivals. She saw Senator Cross's wife, who'd always looked down on her, now watching with a cold, satisfied smirk. She saw the bankers, the politicians, the old money families all capturing her family's absolute ruin on their iPhones. The money was gone. The status was gone. The reputation she'd spent 60 years meticulously building, the reputation she'd sacrificed her own daughter for, was not just gone. It was a joke, a meme, a cautionary tale that would be told at Chicago dinner parties for the next 20 years. It was absolute, total, and complete annihilation. As the federal agents disappeared through the service exit with Marcus Wellington in tow, the ballroom descended into a new level of hysteria. Savannah let out a sound of pure animalistic grief and collapsed onto the floor, her $40,000 dress pulling around her like a deflated parachute. Guests were scrambling for the exits, shouting into their phones, trying to call their financial advisors, their lawyers, their spouses. The society blogger was still live streaming, her voice a breathless, excited commentary over the sounds of my sister's sobs. But my mother Patricia was not looking at her sobbing daughter. She was not looking at the panicked guests. She stood frozen, her mind working furiously, connecting dots, the timing, the precision, the public nature of it all. This was not a random investigation. This was an execution. Her eyes, wild and furious, scanned the room. This was sabotage. And there was only one person she'd ever blamed for anything that went wrong in her life. One person who was an outsider. One person who'd been unceremoniously kicked out just an hour before. Bianca, she whispered, the name tasting like acid on her tongue. Then she screamed it. It was a raw, accusing shriek that cut through the chaos. Bianca. That Bianca. What did you do? Savannah's head snapped up, her tear-streaked face contorting with new focus. Bianca, she echoed, climbing to her feet, her gown tearing with a sickening rip. She did this. That little government worker did this to me. Patricia, Savannah, and the few remaining shell-shocked relatives, Aunt Diane and Uncle Robert, bypassed the crying guests and flashing phones. They stormed out of the ballroom. A small, furious posse. They weren't just family members anymore. They were a lynch mob. They scanned the opulent lobby, eyes searching for me, expecting to find me crying in a corner or running for the exit. They didn't. They found me in the hotel's main bar, the Crown Lounge. I was not in the penthouse. I'd come down. I wanted a front row seat. I was sitting alone at the far end of the polished black marble bar, my back straight, my legs crossed. The simple black dress that my mother had deemed inadequate now looked like a statement of quiet, severe elegance. I was the only person in the entire hotel who was perfectly, completely calm. In my hand, I held a crystal glass of martini with one perfect olive. I'd been watching the entire scene reflected in the mirrors behind the bar. I saw them storm in. I saw their frantic, searching eyes. I saw the moment they spotted me. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my drink, the gin cold and sharp, and turned my head to face them. They spotted me, the little group of for Patricia, Savannah, Aunt Diane, and Uncle Robert froze for a second, their frantic energy locking onto my calm. I didn't smile. I just met their gaze, took a final small sip of my martini, and placed the glass gently on the bar. Patricia was the first to move. She didn't walk. She lunged. She stormed across the lounge, her champagne silk dress dragging on the floor, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. Her diamonds heaved as she panted for breath, stopping just short of the bar. "You!" she shrieked, her voice no longer controlled or sophisticated, but raw and guttural, a sound that made the bartender flinch. "What did you do? Who did you call? You ruined everything. You did this." She slammed her manicured hands on the marble bar, the impact rattling my glass. "You ruined my family. You ruined your sister." I turned slowly on the bar stool to face her fully. I said nothing. I just looked at her, at the smeared makeup, the way her hair was escaping its perfect style, the pure desperation in her eyes. "Mom," I said, my voice quiet, but it cut through her hysteria like ice. "I didn't do anything. I'm just sitting here having a drink, like a stranger should." The word stranger hit her again, and she recoiled. But her rage was too great. "Don't you play innocent with me, you ungrateful little," she caught herself, aware of the bartender and other patrons watching. "You called them, didn't you?" Savannah stumbled forward, her voice thick with sobs. Her $40,000 dress was torn at the hem, mascara streaming in black rivers down her face. She looked like a ghost of the radiant bride from an hour ago. She gripped the back of a bar chair, her knuckles white. "You called the FBI, didn't you?" She wept. "You were jealous. You've always been jealous of me. Jealous that I was getting this wedding. Jealous that I had Marcus. Jealous that I was happy. So you ruined it. You ruined my life." Aunt Diane and Uncle Robert stood behind them, their faces pale. They looked horrified, not at me, but at the scene their perfect elite family was making in the middle of a public hotel bar. The bartender was frozen, polishing a glass, pretending not to listen. A few other patrons at the far end of the lounge had their phones out, discreetly filming. My family, even in their ruin, could not escape an audience. Jealous? The word came out of me, not as a question, but as genuine, cold curiosity. I actually laughed. It was a short, dry, humorless sound that cut through the lounge. "Jealous of what, Savannah?" Savannah stared at me, her mouth open, her sobs momentarily forgotten. She had no answer. She'd always assumed jealousy was my primary motivator. "Let me be clear," I said, setting my martini glass down with a precise click. "Am I jealous of your $40,000 dress? It's beautiful, but it's not my style." I looked at my nails, then back at her. "Am I jealous that you were until an hour ago the center of attention for 300 people? No, as you've both pointed out, I'm not really a large crowd kind of person." I leaned forward slightly, my voice dropping to a conversational, almost pleasant tone. "Or am I jealous that you were about to marry a complete and total fraud? Am I jealous that your entire relationship was a business transaction designed to give a criminal respectable cover? Am I jealous that you were about to tie your life, your name, and your future to a man who's currently being arrested for running a massive, multi-million-dollar Ponzi scheme?" The word Ponzi hung in the air. Savannah's face went from tear-streaked to completely blank with shock. She didn't understand the full implications, but Patricia did. My mother's eyes widened, her pupils dilating. I saw the flash of pure terror. Marcus had used that word, accomplice. "Indicted. You don't know what you're talking about," Patricia stammered. But the mask was gone. This was pure, raw fear. "You're just saying things. You're making it up. How could you possibly know anything about Marcus's business?" She laughed, a desperate, cracking sound. "You're a bookkeeper. You're just a little government accountant. You sit in a cubicle all day adding numbers. You don't know anything about high finance." "A little accountant," I repeated, nodding slowly. "A boring, quiet little accountant." I let the insult hang in the air. Let them both cling to it as their last piece of solid ground. Let them see me as the small, insignificant, awkward failure they'd always needed me to be. "That's where you're wrong, Mom," I said. "That's the part you never understood." I signaled the bartender for my check. "You were never interested. You never actually asked what I do. You just assumed. You heard government and accountant and you created this entire narrative of me being a failure. A little accountant, as you so eloquently put it. You pictured me in a gray cubicle somewhere in the bowels of DC auditing travel expenses, bored and lonely. Patricia's face was a mask of confusion. But you are an accountant, she said weakly. I am an accountant, I agreed, pulling my credit card from my clutch. But there are different kinds of accountants, mother. Just like there are different kinds of doctors. Savannah wanted to be a plastic surgeon, right? To make rich people look prettier. That's one kind. I signed the check, leaving a generous tip. I stood up from the bar stool, smoothing down my dress. For the first time, I felt taller than her. I'm not the kind of accountant who just adds numbers. I'm the kind of accountant who finds numbers. Numbers that powerful men like Marcus Wellington try very hard to hide. A flicker of genuine cold fear entered Patricia's eyes. What are you talking about? I am a forensic accountant, I stated clearly, letting each word land with precision. I work for the Department of Justice. My specific division? The White-Collar Crime Task Force. Savannah just looked blank. The words meant nothing to her, but Patricia knew. She knew what justice and white-collar crime meant. You're lying, she whispered. Am I? For the past 6 years, my job, the one you called boring and pathetic, has been to track, trace, and build cases against men exactly like Marcus Wellington. Men who build empires on stolen money. Men who run elaborate fraud schemes. Men who think they're too smart, too rich, and too well connected to ever get caught. I looked over at Savannah. I don't just add numbers, Savannah. I follow them. I follow them right to offshore accounts, fake shell corporations, and all the people they pay off. People just like Mom. Patricia and Savannah just stood there, completely frozen. The blood had drained from both their faces. All the color, all the life, all the righteous anger gone, replaced by a hollow, sickening understanding. The lounge music, a soft jazz piano, suddenly seemed incredibly loud in the silence that had fallen between us. Savannah's hand was still gripping the bar chair, but she looked like she might collapse. Patricia's mouth was open, moving slightly, but no sound was coming out. She was trying to form a word, no or liar, but her brain had disconnected from her mouth. All those years they'd seen me as quiet, awkward, harmless, a failure, a little accountant, and now that failure was standing in front of them, holding a martini and calmly explaining that she was the architect of their complete and total ruin. I looked at my mother's terrified face. I looked at my sister's blank, shattered expression. I raised my glass as if in a silent toast. Then I delivered the final, fatal blow. And by the way, I said, my voice as calm as if I were discussing the weather, I wasn't just assigned to this case. I was the one who opened it. I have been personally tracking the Marcus Wellington investigation for the last 20 months. I took a final sip. The wedding gift has been delivered. 20 months? Savannah whispered. The words came out choked, disbelieving. You've been watching him for 20 months and you didn't say anything? Say what, Savannah? I asked, my voice genuinely curious. What would I have said? Hey sis, just a heads up, I think your new millionaire boyfriend is a massive fraud? When would I have told you? At the Christmas dinner where Mom wouldn't stop talking about the diamond bracelet he bought her. Or at the Easter brunch where you flashed your engagement ring around like a trophy. I shook my head, pushing the empty martini glass away. You wouldn't have listened. You didn't want to know. You too were so blinded by the money, by the status, by the idea of Marcus Wellington. You never stopped to ask if any of it was real. That's a lie, Patricia hissed, her voice finding strength again. Marcus was a successful, respected businessman. No, I countered, my voice sharp and precise, the voice I used when cross-examining hostile witnesses. He wasn't. He was a rumor. A man with no verifiable history. That's what first caught my attention. It wasn't even his money. It was his gifts to you, Mom. Patricia looked confused. My gifts? The bracelet, I said. The one you wore at Christmas. You bragged it was from a private jeweler in Geneva. I paused. I ran the jeweler's name. It doesn't exist. The private wire transfer he sent you for your birthday? It wasn't from a US bank. It was routed through 3 different shell corporations, starting in Switzerland. I let that sink in. You see, Mom, you thought it was a status symbol. I saw it as a federal offense. That's my job. I started the preliminary file on him right after that. Just a quiet background check. And what I found was nothing. No college records. No early career. He just appeared in Chicago 6 years ago, with a lot of money and a good story. I turned my gaze to Savannah, who was listening in dawning horror. Men like that don't just appear. They're manufactured. He didn't want you, Savannah. He wanted our name. He knew he was being investigated. He was desperate. He needed a shield. And what better shield than marrying into the Hayes family? One of Chicago's established African American families, with a father known for his community standing and integrity. I paused. He wasn't marrying you. He was buying your reputation to hide his crimes. Savannah's face crumpled, fresh tears streaming down. And that brings us back to the real question, doesn't it? I asked, my voice dropping even quieter. Why did you really try so hard to keep me away from this wedding? Savannah just stared, her mind unable to keep up. I told you I didn't want you to feel uncomfortable, awkward. I finished for her. You didn't want me to shut down. That was the excuse, wasn't it? The lie you both agreed on. I shook my head, a small gesture of pity. No, that's not it. You've never cared about my comfort before. You've paraded my awkwardness at family events for 20 years. You enjoyed it. It made you both feel superior. I leaned in. So what changed? Why this time? Why was it so critical that I be nowhere near this event? I looked at my mother, who was now trembling, her face chalk white. I'll tell you why. Because you knew. You didn't know what he was not specifically. You didn't know the name of the crime or how many people he'd hurt, but you knew he was shady. No, Patricia whispered, her voice cracking. Isn't it? I pressed. You knew the money was coming too fast. You knew the gifts were too expensive. You knew his stories didn't add up. You knew that $600,000 gift in your Swiss account wasn't normal. You knew it was dirty. You didn't care as long as it bought Savannah this spectacle. I let the accusation hang in the air, and that's why you couldn't have me here. Not because I'm awkward, but because I'm the boring little accountant, the one person in this family who actually looks at numbers. The only one who might have seen Marcus for what he was. You weren't afraid I'd be uncomfortable. You were terrified I'd notice. I remembered when I was 22, home from college. My father's business was struggling. I'd looked at the household books just to help out, and I'd found thousands of dollars in undocumented expenses Patricia was hiding from him. When I pointed it out, she'd slapped my face and told me never, ever to look at her private finances again. She knew exactly what I was capable of seeing. You weren't trying to protect me, I said to Savannah. You were trying to protect him. And Mom was trying to protect her $600,000 commission. Savannah finally broke, the weight of the lies. The arrest, and now this revelation. It was too much. He told me it was just a tax issue. She wailed, her hands covering her face, her whole body shaking. A disagreement with the IRS. He said it was normal for men at his level. He said he would handle it. He promised me. He promised you, I repeated, my voice devoid of sympathy. And you believed him because you wanted to believe him. You wanted the $40,000 dress and the congressional connections so badly. You decided not to look any closer. I turned my full attention back to my mother, who was now backed against a pillar, trapped by my words and her own guilt. And you, Mom? $600,000? That's a lot of money, even for you. It was a gift, she insisted weakly, for Savannah. To set her up, or to pay you off. I countered. This isn't the first time, is it? You've always found ways to get gifts to maintain this lifestyle. You call it social networking. My colleagues and I call it undisclosed compensation. I remembered all the commissions she'd earned over the years. The consulting fee for introducing a developer to a city council member at one of her charity balls. The finder's fee from an art dealer after she convinced a wealthy friend to buy an overpriced Questionable painting. My father, a man of simple, old school integrity, had built a respectable community reputation. But my mother had been using that reputation as a commodity for years. She was a social broker, trading access and influence for cash and favors, all to keep up the appearance of being old money elite. Marcus Wellington wasn't her first shady deal. He was just her biggest. You've been selling this family's name for decades, I said quietly. Marcus was just your largest payday. He wasn't just marrying Savannah. He was buying you, Mom, your connections, your social protection. And you were so blinded by the money, you didn't realize you weren't dealing with a simple tax evader. You were dealing with a predator. And you let him right into our family. Stop it, she whispered. Stop it. I can't stop it, I said. I didn't start it, but I am finishing it. I'm finishing it, I said, my voice resonating with authority. They'd never heard from me, because while you were worried about your social status, Marcus was destroying lives. Real lives, Mom. Patricia just shook her head, muttering, No, 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 yes, I insisted. That $600,000 you hid in your secret account, did you ever once ask where it came from? Did you care? I didn't wait for an answer. I did. That was my job. I traced it. That money didn't come from creative investments. It was the entire retirement savings of Mr. and Mrs. Henderson. You know them, Mom. The Hendersons from our church. The ones who run the community food drive every year. Patricia's hand flew to her mouth. She looked like she was going to be sick. That wasn't all, I continued, my voice relentless. There were 60 other families, teachers from Savannah's old high school, small business owners in our own neighborhood, 60 families in this community who trusted Marcus with their life savings. And he stole it all. He stole their retirements, their children's college funds, their homes. Savannah let out a choked, horrified sob. This was no longer about a failed wedding. She was realizing she was the villain in a much larger, much darker story. You weren't just an accomplice to creative accounting, Mom, I said, my voice dropping. You were an accomplice to the financial ruin of your own community. You took blood money. You took it and you hid it all so Savannah could have a $40,000 dress. Stop it. Patricia finally shrieked, her hands over her ears. You're lying. You're just trying to hurt me. You hate me. I don't need to hurt you, Mom. The truth is enough, as my mother's words echoed. A new figure stepped into the lounge. He was calm, dressed in a sharp dark suit, and had been standing quietly by the entrance, observing. He was African American, about my age, with a professional, no-nonsense demeanor. He now walked past the gawking patrons, past the frozen bartender. He walked past me as if I weren't even there. He walked past the sobbing, ruined Savannah. He walked directly up to my mother, who was still muttering liar under her breath, and he stopped. He looked at her, his face impassive, and spoke. His voice was not loud, but it cut through every other sound in the room. Mrs. Patricia Hayes. It was my colleague Jamal, the head of the task force, and he was on the clock. Patricia froze, her hands still fluttering at her throat. I don't understand, she stammered, her eyes darting between Jamal and me. Jamal's face was impassive. He didn't look at me. His entire focus was on my mother, Mrs. Patricia Hayes. We have several questions for you regarding wire transfers totaling $600,000 originating from accounts associated with Wellington Equity. We also have questions about an undisclosed Swiss account. We need you to come with us to answer questions regarding the knowing receipt of proceeds from a criminal enterprise. The official legal terminology hit her harder than any of Marcus's shouts. This wasn't a family argument anymore. This was a federal crime. No, Patricia whispered, her eyes wide with pure terror, finally snapped to me. The hatred was gone, replaced by desperate, pleading panic. Bianca, she gasped, her voice cracking. Bianca, please do something. Tell them it's a mistake. Tell them it was a gift. She lurched forward, her manicured hands grabbing my arm. Her grip was like a claw. Bianca, you have to help me. Tell them you're with the government. You work for them. You can fix this. Tell them I didn't know. This was the moment. The woman who just 1 hour ago had looked at me with such contempt, who'd called me a stranger and an embarrassment, was now clinging to me. She was begging the boring little accountant to save her. Bianca, please, she sobbed, her face crumbling. I'm your mother. You can't let them do this. We're family. You have to tell them we're family. I looked down at her, hands on my arm. I felt nothing, no pity, no anger, just a vast cold emptiness. I very deliberately unhooked her fingers from my sleeve. One by one, I stepped back, putting a small clean distance between us. I looked directly into her terrified, tear-filled eyes, the eyes of the woman who had called me a stranger. You're right, Patricia, I said, my voice quiet, but it carried across the dead silent bar. Family is very important. Her face flooded with pathetic, desperate hope. Yes, yes. See, I gave her a small cold smile. But you told me yourself. Strangers aren't allowed. Her hope froze, her face slackening in confusion. I held her gaze. And I don't know you. I don't know you, I said. The words and the sound of them hung in the silent bar. Jamal, my colleague, gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. He gently took my mother's arm. Mrs. Hayes, you need to come with us. Patricia didn't resist. She was completely broken. All the fight, all the fire, all the arrogance that had defined her entire life gone. She looked like a frail old woman, her champagne dress suddenly looking like a cheap costume. She let Jamal and the other agent lead her out of the lounge. She didn't look back. Savannah was still on the floor, huddled by the bar stool, sobbing. Not the loud performance sobs from the ballroom, but quiet, gut-wrenching sobs of someone whose entire world had just ceased to exist. Aunt Diane and Uncle Robert just stood there, pale and shaking, staring at me as if I were a monster they'd never truly seen before. I picked up my clutch from the bar, my hands perfectly steady. Bartender, I said, my voice cutting through the silence. Could I close my tab, please? The bartender, who'd been frozen in place, fumbled with the terminal. Yes, ma'am. Of course. I signed the slip, added a generous tip, and walked past my weeping sister, past my horrified relatives, and out of the Crown Lounge. I didn't go back to the penthouse. I walked out of the Peninsula Hotel into the cool Chicago night air, hailed a cab, and went straight to O'Hare Airport. My work here was done. By the time I landed back in DC. The next morning, the story had exploded. It wasn't just local news. It was national. Chicago wedding day arrest. Wellington Equity founder accused of massive Ponzi scheme. The footage was everywhere. Clips of Marcus being led away in handcuffs, juxtaposed with the opulent wedding decor. Shaky phone videos of Savannah screaming and collapsing. The Society blogger's breathless live stream had become the primary source for every major news outlet. But that wasn't the headline that truly mattered. By noon, the Chicago Tribune had broken the real story, the one that connected everything. The headline read, "The Hayes family connection, bride's sister, a Dodge forensic accountant, was the lead investigator." The story was a masterpiece of journalistic digging. It detailed how Bianca Hayes, the quiet daughter, the accountant, had opened the file on Marcus Wellington 20 months prior. It detailed how I'd meticulously built the case against him while my family planned the wedding of the year. The narrative was devastating. The Hayes name, once a pillar of Chicago's established African American community, a name synonymous with integrity and generational respectability, was now inextricably linked to fraud, greed, and a Ponzi scheme that had ruined their own neighbors. My father, a man who'd spent his life on community boards and charity fundraisers, was ruined by association. His wife had been arrested for money laundering. His golden daughter had been exposed as a social climber willing to marry a criminal. The Hayes family reputation wasn't just tarnished, it was incinerated. Several months passed. The media frenzy had died down, replaced by the slow, methodical grind of the justice system. The Chicago Society pages, having feasted on the scandal, had moved on to newer, less devastating gossip. But for the main players, the consequences were just beginning. For Marcus Wellington, the end was swift. The case I'd spent 20 months building was airtight. The evidence was overwhelming, a digital and financial breadcrumb trail that led directly to him with no escape routes. Faced with a mountain of irrefutable proof, the fake accounts, the wire transfers, the testimonies from victims, his legal team advised him to take a plea deal. It barely mattered. He was found guilty on multiple counts of wire fraud, securities fraud, and money laundering. He was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. His life as a charismatic, high-flying financier was over, replaced by the stark reality of a concrete cell. My mother, Patricia, did not fare much better. Her arrest at the wedding had been just the beginning. The $600,000 in her undisclosed Swiss account was the nail in her coffin. It was the irrefutable link that changed her from a potential victim into a knowing accomplice. My testimony, along with the bank records I provided, proved she wasn't just a social climber blinded by wealth. She was a paid participant, a broker who'd accepted a massive fee to help a criminal secure social cover. She was indicted by a grand jury on charges of conspiracy to commit wire fraud and money laundering. The federal government froze every asset tied to her name. The grand house in the wealthy Chicago suburb, the one my father's respectable name had secured and her ambition had decorated, was seized. The luxury cars, the designer wardrobe, the art collection, all of it tagged as proceeds purchased with criminal funds. She was released on bail, but she had nowhere to go. She'd lost everything: her house, her friends, her money, but worse than that, for her, was the loss of her name. In Chicago society, she was now a pariah. The same women she'd competed with, the same charity boards she'd dominated, now shunned her. She was a social outcast, a cautionary tale whispered about at the very country clubs she'd once ruled. She'd lost the only thing she'd ever truly valued, her status. And then there was Savannah, my golden child sister. Her fate was, in many ways, the most tragic. She wasn't a criminal, not in the legal sense. She was just collateral damage. In the wake of the scandal, she was left with absolutely nothing. Marcus's credit cards, which she'd been living on, were declined. The lavish condo they'd shared was seized by the feds. The wedding gifts still piled in the hotel ballroom were impounded as potential assets purchased with fraudulent funds. She was left with only her personal belongings and her name, a name that was now synonymous with the biggest scandal Chicago society had ever seen. She was a social pariah overnight. The same friends who'd vied to be her bridesmaids now crossed the street to avoid her. The society bloggers who'd once praised her style now wrote scathing articles, painting her as either a naive fool or a willing participant. She was uninvited from every charity board, every junior league committee, every social event she'd ever attended. She was radioactive, with no money and no connections. Her perfect life evaporated. I heard from Aunt Diane in a rare, gossipy phone call that Savannah had been seen at a high-end consignment shop, selling her designer handbags and shoes one by one. The $40,000 wedding dress, which she'd never even gotten to wear to a reception, was reportedly sold for a fraction of its cost. Just to pay the deposit on a new apartment, she had to move out of the seized condo and into a tiny one-bedroom apartment in a part of town she once would have called undesirable. No doorman, no pool, no status. I pictured her there alone, surrounded by the last vestiges of her former life, and I felt a small, strange pang of pity. But the worst part for her, I imagined, was the realization the moment it must have truly hit her. She wasn't Marcus's beloved partner. She was his cover. She wasn't our mother's prized creation. She was her primary commodity. She'd spent her entire life being the perfect daughter, only to realize she was just a pawn in Marcus's criminal enterprise and a bargaining chip in our mother's desperate, greedy climb up the social ladder. She'd been sold, and she hadn't even known the price. I returned to my office at the Department of Justice in Washington, D.C. It wasn't a small gray cubicle. It was a spacious, private office with a view of the Capitol, an office I'd earned through years of relentless, difficult work. The news of the Chicago wedding scandal had, of course, reached my colleagues. But here, it was different. Jamal, my boss, just put a fresh cup of coffee on my desk. Good work, Hayes, he said. You closed the case. That's all that matters here. And that was the truth. The narrative my family had built around me was a complete fiction, a story they'd told themselves to make their own choices seem superior. I was never awkward, Maya. I was focused. Bianca. I was never antisocial. I was observant. My silence at those dreadful family dinners, the awkwardness my mother was so ashamed of, was never social anxiety. It was profound, soul-crushing boredom. I couldn't engage in their superficial small talk. I couldn't bring myself to care about which new car my uncle bought or which country club Aunt Diane was joining, while they were discussing designer labels and vacation homes. My mind was tracing complex money laundering schemes across 3 continents, while they were judging my boring government job. I was preparing cases that would put men far richer and more powerful than them in prison. My silence wasn't weakness. It was my weapon. I was an observer. I watched them. I saw their petty jealousies, their desperate social climbing, their complete lack of moral character. They weren't just shallow. They were, in many ways, fundamentally corrupt long before Marcus Wellington ever entered the picture. They just operated on a smaller, legal but unethical scale. They thought I was the failure, but I had been judging them my entire life. I sat at my desk, looking at the case file for Wellington Equity, now stamped in red. Closed.it was my biggest case to date, and it was finished. 6 months later, Terry stood in my apartment, high above Washington, D.C. The view from my window wasn't just of the city, it was of the Capitol Dome, glowing white against the twilight sky. My home was quiet, ordered, and peaceful. It was everything my childhood home had never been. The thin, flimsy letter from the Cook County Jail fell out of place in my hand. I opened it. The handwriting was messy, rushed, stained with what looked like tear marks. Bianca, I know you have every reason to hate me forever. I know I deserve this. I was a fool. I was so blinded by what Mom wanted, by what Marcus promised. I never stopped to see what was real. I see it now. I see how I treated you. I was jealous, Bianca. I was always so jealous that you were smart, that you were real, and that you didn't seem to care what anyone thought of you. I paused, reading that line again. Jealous of me. The irony was bitter. I'm going to pay for what I did. But Mom, she's not like us. She's falling apart in here. She won't survive. They're going to make an example of her because of what Marcus did. You're the only one who has any power. Please, Bianca, I'm not asking for me, but please, can you help her? Can you get her out? She's still our mother, our mother. I folded the letter. She was still trying to pull me back, still trying to use the word family as a lever. I looked at the letter, at Savannah's desperate plea to save the very woman who'd orchestrated our mutual ruin. I picked up my phone, my thumb hovering over Jamal's contact. I could have forwarded him the letter, adding a note. Evidence of conspiracy. Looks like the mother-daughter relationship is breaking down. Might be useful for prosecution, but I didn't. I scrolled past his name. I went to my professional contacts and found the name of a top defense attorney in Chicago, a man I knew from a previous, unrelated case. A shark, I dialed. He picked up on the second ring. David, I said, my voice, all business. It's Bianca Hayes. I have a recommendation for you. A new client. I paused, looking out at the Capitol, at the seat of law and justice, a world where I belonged and they did not. My sister, Savannah Hayes. She's in Chicago, and she's going to need a very good lawyer to start over. I listened for a moment. No, I won't be involved personally. Just give her your best rate. Thank you. I hung up. I had done it one final act. Not of forgiveness, not of love, but of closure. I had given Savannah the tools she needed to build her own life, separate from our mother's influence. I had given her a chance, the one thing our family had never given me, but I was not getting involved. I would not pay her bills. I would not post her bail, and I would certainly not save Patricia. My mother had called me a stranger, and as a stranger, I owed her nothing. I picked up the letter from Savannah and walked over to my fireplace, I struck a match and held it to the corner of the paper. I watched the flames turn the desperate plea to ash. I was free, I was successful, and I was finally at peace. Epilogue. This story shows the danger of valuing appearance over integrity. Bianca's family, obsessed with social status and wealth, embraced a criminal because he looked successful. They excluded Bianca because she seemed boring and didn't fit their image, but Bianca's boring job was her secret weapon. While they were busy planning a party, she was busy doing her job, investigating the very fraud they were benefiting from. The lesson is clear: true power lies in substance, not in perception. The quietest person in the room is often the most observant and ultimately the most powerful. Have you ever been the Bianca in your family, quietly observing while everyone else underestimated you? Share your story in the comments below.